In the news today, executives from Jeff Bezos to Bill Ford, who's running the Ford Motor Company right now, and also Marc Benioff. He's the CEO of Salesforce.com. Yesterday, they all sent a message to Joe Biden, and that is, you've got to fight climate change, and you've got to fight it right now. Marc Benioff said, as we recover from COVID-19 and rebuild the global economy, we must also act on climate change. In fact, these are not separate missions. They're one and the same. Now, as somebody who would run a global company, I would wonder why some of these corporations that are, let's say, making shoes or clothing over in China would want a heavier tax on, let's just say, oil, because they put all of their products onto a giant ship and ship it over from China. So it seems to me as though that would hurt their bottom line. Okay, so the explanation is, oh, well, they care. Really? And the left buys that these global corporations, these gigantic corporations that they've always hated, always told us we were living in a corporate world, all of a sudden, those same corporations, they suddenly care? Why would these corporations push to have the government tell them who they can have on the board? I don't know anybody that wants that opens up their door and says, oh my gosh, I want the government to regulate me more. Can the government tell me how to run my company? Because I know the government is so good at running the government that they've got to be good running something they have no idea about, right? They're geniuses. Let's bring them in. Can you guys tell me exactly what the balance should be? Men, women, minorities? How many white men should work here? Should we fire some of them? Why would a corporation do that? Well, the guy who wrote, as we recover from COVID-19, rebuild the global economy, we must also act on climate change. They're not separate missions. In fact, they're one and the same. That guy who wrote that yesterday, who wrote that from Davos, specifically wrote that while he was participating in the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. He wrote that at the same time this guy who is worth $8.8 billion. Personally, his net worth is $8.8 billion. Built on capitalism. He said this yesterday. Listen.
Capitalism, as we know it, is dead. This obsession that we have had with maximizing profits for shareholders alone has led to incredible inequality and a planetary emergency.
Did you hear what he said? Capitalism is dead. Capitalism is dead. So now how can a capitalist worth $8.8 billion, who's running a global corporation, who's joining with very successful capitalists, how can he possibly say capitalism is dead? Well, because there's a new goal. And I want you to hear carefully. This is what was played yesterday at Davos, at the World Economic Forum's conference on the Great Reset. And I want you to listen to how they have changed the message. A year ago, before we started talking about it and others like us started talking about it, the Great Reset was very, very clear. Capitalism is dead, a new kind of capitalism, the Chinese version of capitalism, which is an oligarchy. That's all it is. giant people at the very top of the ladder with billions of dollars actually have a partnership with the government. And you know this is happening now. You can see it with Google and Facebook and all the others. They are partnering with the government to take care of some responsibilities. We have a responsibility to make sure these voices aren't heard. The same goal as some in the government. In fact, the controlling wing now of the government. And these policies can happen because it's not the government doing it. It's these private companies that just happen to be partnered with the government. Now, they were very clear. By 2030, you won't own anything. There will be no private property by 2030. That is one of the goals of the Great Reset. But listen carefully to how they are packaging this now today.
The pandemic has radically changed the world as we know it, and the actions we take today as we work to recover will define our generation.
Now is the time to think what history would say about this crisis.
2020 has been challenging on a lot of levels, as economic, environmental, and societal frailties have been laid bare. But it's also proved that when we need to, we can act rapidly and restructure our lives.
Stop.
Recovery from the pandemic is an opportunity.
Stop. So far, everything I agree with, but then there is that one little line that we can all work together and restructure our lives. I want you to listen to the word we differently. I want you to listen to the words the people differently. I want you to understand that the people are not in these meetings, okay? Global billionaires, global corporations, global banks, and global leaders are in this, but not you, not the average person. So it's the elites. When they say we can restructure our lives, it means we can get the people to restructure their lives. Keep listening.
On a lot of levels, as economic, environmental, and societal frailties have been laid bare. But it's also proved that when we need to, we can act rapidly and restructure our lives.
Recovery from the pandemic is an opportunity. We can see rays of hope in the form of a vaccine, but there is no vaccine for the planet. Nature needs a bailout.
You don't want to go back to the status quo that you had before simply because it was the status quo that got us here.
With everything falling apart, we can reshape the world in ways we couldn't before. Ways that better address so many of the challenges we face. And that's why so many are calling for a great reset. A great reset? That
Listen
sounds
to
more
this.
like buzzword bingo masking some nefarious plan for world domination. Hands up, this kind of slogan hasn't gone down well. But all we really want to say is that we all have an opportunity to build a better world.
Sounds
And
great.
it's not surprising that people who've been disenfranchised by a broken system and pushed even further by the pandemic will suspect global leaders of conspiracy. But the world's not that simple. Every one of us has differing priorities, values, and ideas. That's part of why solutions are so hard to come by, and why we all need to be involved in the decision-making.
Right.
Because whether it's politicians, CEOs, academics, activists, or you, we're all about getting people together, even those you may not like, to sit down at the table and develop solutions that work for all of us. But
We need enormous trust between the private sector and the public sector for this to actually work. That trust is hard to come by.
Stop. When they're talking about the private sector and the public sector, they are not talking again about you. They are talking about the corporations. We need trust between the corporations and the government to come together, and that's very difficult to come by.
it's time for people to work together, listen to each other, and build this trust so we can move towards a better world. And we really need one. Because while the pandemic affects us all, it's clear it affects some more than others.
The first people who are hit are the people at the front, those who are vulnerable. It is those on the front line who take it first, and that is simply unacceptable.
See, at the start of 2020, 1% of the world's population owned 44% of the wealth. And since the start of the pandemic, billionaires have increased theirs by more than 25%, whilst 150 million people fell back into extreme poverty. And with climate change set to dwarf the damage caused by the pandemic, the message from 2020 should be abundantly clear.
Capitalism, as we know it, is dead. This obsession that we have had with maximizing profits for shareholders alone has led to incredible inequality and a planetary emergency.
$8.8 billion is net worth.
But no one can do this alone, and top-down approaches won't get us anywhere, because everything we've learned in our work has shown us that diverse voices lead to better results.
Right.
And it's for these reasons that the forum talks about something called stakeholder capitalism, which would shift businesses away from just profit, because
if we want to change where the focus of our recovery will go, then we need a new dashboard for the new economy, and that needs to encompass people, planet, prosperity, and institutions.
giving people a real stake in the economy and putting well-being before growth. And that's all about getting the right people in the right place at the right time.
The right people.
We must rebuild our relationship with nature for the survival of the peoples and our planet.
We have a window of time which is closing, and we need everybody who cares to get together and find solutions now.
It's the people who have great ideas and who share them with others. They're the ones who are shaping the future. So if you want to be a part of the change, then tune in, turn on, and get involved. Follow the Davos Agenda.
Hippie.
Right here, online, on YouTube.
Tune in, turn on, drop out used to be the hippie phrase. It's interesting to me. They talk about the people here. The people have the good ideas. The people are changing the world. And they also say a top-down solution doesn't work. So have they involved you? Have they asked you your opinion? Have you been asked to be a part of Davos? I mean, I know the average person is always over in Davos. I mean, this year, because of COVID, did you make it to Davos? They're not talking about people. This is a propaganda campaign to make people feel better. But what are they talking about? They're talking about more global regulation. Will that empower you? Does more regulation empower you to start your own business, to do the things you want to do? Or does it stop that from happening? Remember, Bill Gates, who's all for this, said he couldn't even start in his own garage, Microsoft today, just because of the federal regulation. So does that help Bill Gates? Sure it does. It stops new people from coming up with new ideas in their garage and doing something to oust Bill Gates. We are an oligarchy today. We have to have a reset in our language. And I believe this applies to me, maybe as much, if not more, than others. And that reset that comes in my language has to be to move from the words socialism. My father said to me when I was young, and I said, "Dad, can I talk to you about God?" He said, "Sure, under one condition." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "We stop calling him God for this conversation." And I said, "What?" He said, "The word God, when you say it, everyone, no matter if they're related and grew up in the same house and in the same church, everyone has a slightly different view of God. And so you can never pin it down that you're actually talking about the same thing because it carries too much baggage with it. It carries too much folklore. It carries too much everything. So you can't talk about the mechanics of God because doctrine will play a role and just different ways that people see God. Some people believe he's here and there and everywhere, but not in trees. Some people believe, of course he's in trees. And you're never going to get to that part of it when you're talking about the basics of God. So I said, all right, what do we call him? He said, first cause. Will we agree that God is first cause? First cause is something we don't really understand. What, if it was the Big Bang, what caused the Big Bang? What was the first cause? What lit the match? So quick conversations with my dad were really frustrating, but that's beside the point. But he was right. We have to stop calling what's happening to us socialism, communism, fascism, because if I can quote this book, The Road We Are Traveling, 1914-1942. This was written in with an FDR contemporary. He said we have to stop calling this new system. Now, this is 1945. This new system that America and the world is on, fascism, communism, capitalism, because it's none of those, and those words become meaningless. We have to call it System X. So that's what they're calling System X. I think what we can call the system that is being built now is an oligarchy, where you have the extreme rich and the extreme powerful making all the decisions, and they benefit from it, and the crumbs come, off the table into your lap. And they do everything they can just to keep you happy. For instance, I can tell you right now that Antifa does not like Joe Biden. They pushed for Donald Trump to get out. They were really being used, I believe, by the Democratic Party last summer. But that doesn't mean that they're for it. And if you remember what happened on, was it Monday or Sunday over the weekend, where Antifa was rioting in Portland, they were rioting against Joe Biden because they said he is just part of this corporate oligarchy. They're being used right now. Our differences are being used. We are chasing our tails while they are building a safe house. We are tearing each other apart over race, and they want us to do that. They want us to be at each other's throats because it allows them to provide the solution, and it allows them to build all of the framework of this new peaceful world.